Hello, everyone. I'm joined by B33. How do you want me to call you?
You can call me B3, B33, anything, whatever.
I'll call you B3. It's easy to remember. And we are, for some reason, I'm not entirely clear. Somebody asked me to. We're debating, I guess, on the Shroud of Turin. I'm not entirely sure what about the Shroud of Turin. Do you want to maybe lay out what the stakes are?
Sure, yeah. So the original thing that happened was I popped into Digital Gnosis's Discord because I was on the stream the other day, and I remember during the stream I brought up the Shroud of Turin, and I noticed that there was lots of nervous laughter and smirks and dismissal, and I didn't want to debate the Shroud at the time, but it's something I've studied for a long time, and I've noticed that atheists tend to have a tendency to demand physical evidence, like they want physical proof of Christ's divinity and so on. But then when you bring the Shroud up, they just laugh and smirk and they just dismiss it out of hand without having looked at it at all.
I see. So your contention is that the Shroud stands as physical proof of Christ's existence, or
no? I don't say it's proof. I say it's a strong extra. Like if you think there's good evidence for the resurrection, the Shroud sort of helps you along the way. It gives a little bit of physical information there. So I'm just wondering why atheists are so dismissive of it when they're always demanding proof of physical proof.
Well, I'm not an atheist, so I can't speak for them. But I think generally speaking, the proof it's not just something proffered as proof. It has to be compelling. Like for myself, I don't know much about the Shroud at all, but my immediate thought is it's a piece of cloth that's been dated to roughly 1200 AD. So we're talking about a piece of cloth, okay, with the imprint of a man's face on it. I don't see how you link that to Christ 1,000 years earlier, and I don't see what it establishes, even if you could.
Well, I'll explain that to you, but maybe we will want to do an affirmative negative. Are we having a formal debate here, or are we just having a discussion?
Well, we don't have a moderator, so I think we're just having a discussion. I guess we'll just try to be polite.
Yeah, so if
you want a moderator, I'm happy to invite somebody in.
Oh, I don't need a moderator. I'll moderate things myself if I have to. But no. So on the question on the Shroud, like you kind of just said, you're not familiar with it. Like you don't know much about it, right?
Yeah.
And you also said that simply based on the carbon dating, you believe it's from the 13th century, right?
That's what I've read a while ago, and I actually don't know specifically which century.
Yeah, well, this is the exact same view I held during my 15, 16 years of atheism. I just dismissed it as a relic and put it out of my head. I wouldn't even look at it because what is the point of looking at a physical artifact of a supernatural thing if you think the supernatural is impossible? Like to take the time to actually look at that seems sort of a waste of time, right?
Okay, I take your point that if somebody doesn't take the Shroud as something connected to the supernatural, they're not going to treat it with as much seriousness as if they did. But that still has to be. But hang on, that has yet to be established, nonetheless, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm just saying, I don't watch Ancient Aliens on the History Channel because I already have other beliefs that tell me there's no ancient aliens. But so I can understand why people would never look into the Shroud if they have other reasons for thinking it can't be possible. But once you actually start to look into it, I don't know if you were doing that or not a minute ago, but you realize
I was absolutely not. I'm gonna lay my cards on the table here. I don't find the Shroud interesting in the least. I'm just a little. Somebody said again that you wanted to debate on this, and I had some free time. So,
well, I asked the question why do atheists, when presented with physical evidence, just laugh at it when they're always demanding physical evidence? So,
well, it might just be laughably bad. Well, hang on. Just because evidence is physical doesn't mean it's good. It could be laughably bad evidence nonetheless.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. So I guess my question then is how do you characterize it as being something that isn't laughably bad, so that you can I think point out this irony.
Maybe we could start chronologically. Instead of me giving the strongest reasons, I'll give the first in history. The Shroud has been in circulation since the maybe the 15th, 14th century, and it was claimed to be a relic of it was claimed as the burial clothing of Christ, and it's a very strange artifact. It has no artistic pedigree, right? So typically with art, a piece of art is going to be placed in a context of place and time. You're going to know the genre of art or the tradition of art, and the Shroud is not like that. The Shroud is a linen fabric with a very faint ghostly image on it, was displayed for some hundreds of years, and not until 1900 or 1901 or two was it actually photographed. What happened was this was a relic of devotion and like adoration, but nobody had actually made a photograph of it until the past 120 years. And when that photograph was taken by Secondo Pio was a photographer. He took a photograph of this relic, and when he went into his like red dark room to develop it, he saw the negative, and instead of a ghostly image, what he saw was a very full, accurate like image. So essentially, what we're saying here is that the shroud itself is a photo negative, and when you look at the negative of it, it's a positive. Like you see an actual anatomically correct body of somebody.
I see, and this would work in the favor of it being legitimate, because if it wasn't the case, you would expect it to not be clear under scrutiny. You would expect, of course, it's to be front and center.
There's 2 points there. So first of all, nobody had the ability to take a photograph in the medieval period, as far as we're aware. That's why a lot of people say Da Vinci did it, but we have evidence long before Da Vinci of the shroud. So that's a non-starter. But not only did people not have the ability to take a photograph, but what on earth would be the point of making a photographic negative in the year 1450 or something, and then not having anyone discover it until 1902? So the fact that it has a more clear positive image in the negative, when you have a negative in your face, that's the first thing that made people say scientifically, well, what the heck is this image? And that's why.
So I'm going to stop you there for now. We'll move on to the next your other arguments afterwards. I don't know the science of this at all, so I'm not going to bother challenging that. Let's assume for argument's sake that is exactly what it is as you characterize it. How do you come to the conclusion that this is therefore the shroud that was over Christ's face, and how does this help your case that Christ is divine or something like that? Like, help me out with that.
Yeah, there are lots of lines of reasoning or evidence for the fact that it's Christ. So supposing this was some sort of artistic work in the Middle Ages, right? People in the Middle Ages did not know lots of things. They didn't know what a Roman flagrum looked like. So a Roman flagrum is the thing that they whipped his back with. And a Roman flagrum it was basically a little piece of wood with leather straps with a couple of small barbells, like metal barbells, on the end of 3 of these straps. And if you look at the image of the shroud, you see that his back is covered in these accurate blood wounds of a Roman flagrum.
Oh, that's interesting. So the shroud was a full body covering. For whatever reason, I always thought it was just like a thing that was laid over top. Okay, that's
full frontal and full back. And there is no image underneath the blood. So the blood's first. And the blood is perfectly anatomically with the image, but there's no image under the blood. So the image formed after the blood flow. Anyway, so getting back to things people would not know about the shroud if they fabricated it in the 1500s or the 14 or 1300s, right? So the Roman flagrum is exact. Like we have archaeological digs where they found Roman flagrums where they scourged people. And his back is covered in Roman. The image on the shroud's back is covered in Roman flagrum wounds that are accurate. Like you could put it up against it and see that it's accurate. Not only that, but there were certain rules involved in Roman or Jewish, scourging of people. You're only allowed to hit this many times, and he has the correct number of hits, right? Now you might ask, maybe this is a shroud of somebody who was just crucified, but he also has like the wounds from the crown of thorns. He has the side wound. And his shins are not broken. Whereas a typical crucifixion, there would be no side wound, there would be no crown of thorns, and there would be broken shins to accelerate the death by crucifixion.
All right, so okay, so there's a couple things going on there. I'm immediately skeptical as to how you would determine with accuracy the the specific types of wounds that a person had based upon the evidence of a shroud.
Well, the blood is all over the shroud. You could actually see the flagrum wounds and the side wounds.
Well, I mean, you call them flagrum wounds, but I don't see any reason. Like, what did they look like? Did they have like the specific imprint of a flagrum hit on them?
Yes. So again, I'll describe the flagrum. So the flagrum was like something you have in your hand, like a little small, like a cigar, let's say, like a wooden.
No. I understand that. What I'm asking is like. Maybe we can bring it up because you should be able to see this visually, right?
Yeah, you can bring it.
Okay, so do you want to share a screen if you can find that?
Well, I have no clue how to do that.
there's a button on the bottom here that says share screen, and I can allow you to bring that in. Do you see?
I'm on the phone. I don't see anything like that.
Oh, you're on the phone. Well, maybe you can send me a link then, and I can.
Well, the problem with sending a link is if I actually navigate away from the StreamYard, it'll cancel me out.
I see what you're saying. Okay, fair enough.
Well, anybody listening can look this up themselves, right?
Sure.
So when you examine the blood stains on the Shroud image, the blood looks exactly like you can actually take a flagrum that they pulled from an archaeological dig, and you could take the little barbell that's hanging from the leather straps and put it right on the back of the figure who's in the shroud and see that they're identical. Yeah.
Okay, but like,
and nobody in the Middle Ages would have any clue what a flagrum looks like.
When a wound bleeds, the blood doesn't form the shape of the instrument that caused the wound.
Well, it certainly does if it's a moderate blood flow from hours later from wounds that have been cleaned. So in the case of Christ, like when he was laid in the tomb within the linen shroud, as per like Jewish burial, he was already cleaned. He's already been dead for a long time. So if there's just sort of a residual blood flow going on, it's not going to soak the entire cloth, right? So the blood marks on the shroud are very much moderate.
I'm pretty sure I could be totally off base on this, but my understanding of Jewish burial rituals is they're obsessive about cleanliness, and this was apparently a wealthy burial. So I'm having trouble believing that they would put him in a white shroud while his body is still emitting fluids.
Well, when a man is scourged that way with hundreds of scourges on his back and face, and
but at a certain point, a body stops bleeding, right? And there are ways to deal with that. So, but in any case,
it was also said to be on the Passover night, and by ritual purity rules, like you have to take the body down and bury it before like the dawn, before like the sun goes down and so on. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna look this up quickly. So, Shroud of Turin, is there a website or something that you're aware of that has?
Well, if you just Google like shroud and flagrum, FLAGRUM, you'll find what's necessary there. Well, that was only one example of things that are correct that a medieval forger couldn't know about.
Okay. Well, hang on. I just want to look at this quickly.
Sure. They also didn't know anything about anatomy, so like,
well, they knew a bit about anatomy. No, hang on. They knew a bit about anatomy.
Well, I'll give you other examples. Like they didn't know that in the medieval era, all of the art shows the hand wounds through the palm, whereas the shroud shows it through the wrist.
Oh, I see. You're talking about the anatomical placement of the.
Well, yeah, the anatomical accuracy and also details nobody in the Middle Ages is likely to have known about, right? And
well, they might have. Well, hang on. They might have known that. They might have known that your hand is unlikely to support your weight when it's got a giant hole through it for an extended.
Yeah, they might have conjectured that or suppose that that's certainly possible, but none of the art show that.
Also, does the tradition actually hold in literary terms that the nails were through the hand, or was he simply nailed to the cross?
Well,
non-specified.
In Aramaic, I think in Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew, when they say hand, they mean everything from the wrist up, so it's not specified.
Mm-hmm. So what does it say? What does it say? What would it have said to the people at the time the shroud was found?
Well, it would have said his hands were pierced, right? So in like European languages, that means the hand. It doesn't mean the wrist. Whereas in these earlier languages, it could include the wrist.
Yeah. Hang on a sec.
And keep in mind, these are things I've gathered from documentaries and reading and stuff. But I don't hold myself out to be a perfect shroud expert. So
no, it's fine.
You'd have to dig into the deeper literature of these claims. But these are things that I consider undisputed, like largely undisputed.
No, it's fine. I don't have off the top of my head where it says specifically how he was crucified. So.
Yeah, well, a lot of things that are put on the table here in this discussion, people are going to have to find for themselves. Like we can't necessarily nail down every fact, not to make a pun there.
Okay, well, I mean, the problem you're left with at the end of the day is that let's assume again that everything is exactly as you described. You have a shroud that has an uncanny resemblance to a type of Roman-style execution whose particulars were, let's say, reasonably obscure to whoever found the shroud or whoever first started circulating the shroud, such that it would be uncanny if they managed to replicate precisely the conditions you would find a body in from that time, as we now know with the benefit of modern knowledge of archaeology. Again, that seems to me that that's all you're left with. Nonetheless, you're still left with just an uncanny looking shroud. How do you actually connect this? It seems to me that it's harder to establish the legitimacy of the shroud as evidence than it is to establish the existence of Christ's implicator.
You say it's harder to say that again? Sorry.
It appears to me at first blush that it's harder to establish the connection of the shroud to Christ specifically, because again, it seems much more easy to say that it's, well, you could even just leave it blank like anything else. Like there's just nothing, it seems to me, that definitively.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So I mean, that is why certain secular people who analyze the shroud have made wild hypotheses. They said maybe it was Christ, or maybe it was somebody else. Maybe in the early first century, somebody tried to make a replica, and then there was some seismic
conciliatory than wild, because I think it'd be much easier just to say it's probably.
You got to hear what I'm saying.
Again, I'm assuming I'm giving you a lot of I'm granting you a lot here, and at the end of the day, you can just get to, well, it's just that's kind of interesting. It's weird how it sort of lines up.
Not to make a pun, but we've barely scratched the surface, and the surface is very important of the shroud, because the actual image on the shroud is nanometers. It's a tiny. It's like the actual image is a fibril thinner than a hundredth of a hair, right? There's no image deeper than that in the fibers of the linen. Linen is plant material made from flax, and the actual image is so surface. It's so specific to the surface that if you go even a nanometer into it, there is no image. So we've only barely scratched the surface here, and you're asking a lot of questions. So what I was trying to get at a minute ago was that I sort of lost my train of thought, but the fact that something, you have two lines of evidence here. You have the tradition of the actual shroud, the fact that it was preserved for a long time, and then you have all of the scientific data that came out only in the last century that you want to scratch your head and ask yourself, why was this preserved, and then why does it have these strange features that it does? So that's kind of where things stand right now. Now, what was you asked a question a minute ago, and I was answering it, and then you cut in, so I just sort of forgot the full question you asked.
Yeah, so did I. Again, though, it seems to me that even if I grant you all of this, that we're still stuck here with just, that's weird.
Oh,
it's you can ask, well, why does it have these qualities, and then admit that there is no answer to that, or the answer is lost to us, to be more specific.
Do you know anything? Do you know anything about the STURP team?
No.
Right, the STURP team, STURP, is the Shroud of Turin research project that was undergone in, I guess, the late 1980s, where people from Los Alamos and the highest, Caltech, people at the highest scientific institutions were very curious about all this talk about the shroud, because it was part of the general cultural milieu at the time. We have this shroud that's a photo negative, and it's anatomically accurate and so on. So they were allowed by the Vatican to research the shroud for a couple of weeks or maybe a week long, and they brought all of the state of the art technology from
Los I'm reading Alamos. Here, and the final report was, we can conclude for now that the shroud image is out of a real human form of a scourged crucified man, is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved.
Right, and part of that is the anatomical accuracy. So they brought in people who were, even before the Shroud of Turin research project, there were people talking about it. So you have forensics experts and anatomy experts who, they put their
You still there?
Depiction of an anatomical. I'm here.
You're cutting out. You're cutting out a little bit. I think you're moving through a tunnel or something.
Where did you last hear what I was saying?
Just seconds ago. If you want to just repeat the last
so
sentence.
So people who have analyzed the shroud, both with STURP and before STURP, top forensics experts in Europe, top anatomy experts, and so on. They said this is a accurate depiction of a crucified man. The blood flows are accurate to the anatomy of where blood would flow if you're on a cross, or if you're like recovering from the corpse. The image is not present under the blood, so the image came after the blood. So you'd actually have to put the blood on first. It's real blood. Yeah, so it's a mystery. Like, how did you get a photo negative onto the top of the very smallest possible fibrils of the linen? And there's tons of there's 30 or 40 different physical lines of evidence we could talk about, like the pollen residue. Like there's pollen from.
Oh no! Look! I'm willing to grant all of this. Again, like my issue here.
Sure.
I don't know enough about this to even contest any of this data, and it seems like there are some reputable people who say that it is legitimate. It's not insofar as we're talking about a piece of cloth that was actually made contact with a crucified man. It's legitimate. I just want to know, how on earth do you connect this to the Christ figure such that this stands as evidence for the divinity / existence of Christ?
Yeah, exactly. So I would again bring up the topic of, why was this artifact preserved? If it is from like the first century, say, why would it have been preserved for 2,000 years? Like, so obviously on the one side you have people preserving.
Well, slow down, cowboy. They say less than 1,000 years. They don't say 2,000.
Right, but there are traditions describing this object in the literature going all the way back to the early period, like the 4th, 5th century, and then it falls in and out of
referring to the Shroud of Turin specifically, like to the artifact.
No, because it wouldn't have been called the Shroud of Turin because it hadn't even entered Turin.
No, I understand that, but my question is, how do you draw a continuity between the object we have now and then?
Right, because they describe it as this ghostly faint image on a full body shroud, and there aren't many things like that in history, right?
Well, not now.
There's also drawings. There's also drawings of it that show the actual weave pattern and burn marks that are specific to the shroud, because over 2,000 years it was in fires and stuff. So you can go back to the I forget, it's called a codex, certain book from Eastern Europe or Central Europe. I think the Hungarian codex, I forget. But it shows like distinctive burn holes that were produced by the fact that it was like hid with molten silver in a fire while it was folded up. So you have.
Are you talking about the Hungarian Prey Codex?
Yeah. So basically, you see the same pattern of burn marks in this drawing that's well before Da Vinci, well before the carbon dating and so on, and earlier references to it. It has a whole pedigree going back to the Crusades. It was stolen from Constantinople and so on.
So I'm just reading.
There's lots of theories about what it originally was called.
You can just stop me. Just hang on just one sec, just so I can get in here for a sec. So I'm just reading the Wikipedia article here. You can correct it if it's inadequate. One of the 5 illustrations within the codex shows the body of Jesus being prepared for burial, and also the subsequent resurrection with an angel showing the empty tomb. This illustration shows generic similarities with the Shroud of Turin, that Jesus is shown entirely naked with the arms are on the pelvis, just like in the body image of the Shroud of Turin, that the thumbs in this image appear to be retracted with only 4 fingers visible in each hand, thus matching detail in the Turin shroud. The supposed fabric shows a herringbone pattern similar to the weaving pattern of the Shroud of Turin. So these seem to be like they're interesting coincidences, but I don't see how this stands as evidence that this is the same thing. I mean, it's also a bit strange that we would regard like these are characteristics of the burial itself. It would be strange to me if you would have
They're not.
What do you mean?
I mean, the pattern of burns has nothing to do with the burial. There's L-shaped burns in the shroud. Like there are it's shaped as an L because the thing was folded over in multiple ways so that a few drops would make an L when you unravel it, right? So like these pictures of the shroud show these same L shapes that are on the shroud. That narrows it down to one object. Like you're not going to have a coincidence like that.
I don't think that's.
Well, I mean, you could always posit that.
Why would you?
1 in 10 billion chance to just happen to happen, right? So you could.
Well,
say
I mean, you're. I don't know where you're pulling that number from.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about? You're talking about drawings of an image with the exact.
So hang on a sec. Hang on. Mm-hmm. So. Only 4 fingers visible in each hand. This matching detail in the Turin shroud. The supposed fabric shows a herringbone pattern similar to the weaving pattern of the Shroud of Turin, and that the 4 tiny circles on the lower image, which appear to form an L, perfectly reproduce 4 apparent poker holes on the Turin shroud. Let's take a look at this. Where is the L?
On the actual shroud or on the codex?
I'm looking at the codex right now.
Yeah,
This is a super rudimentary drawing.
Right. It's just that just shows how poor the art of the time was, whereas the shroud is perfect.
What do you mean the shroud is perfect?
In other words, it's anatomically perfect. Like it's a human image.
But I'm not disputing that it's not a forgery.
Sure, yeah.
Like,
I'm just saying. I'm just pointing out that like the drawings of that time are cartoonish. Like there was no tradition of art. There's even a TED talk by a skeptic.
No. I understand that. I'm not dissing the art. What I'm saying,
I'm just tossing evidence on the heap here. I'm not making it a new point. You know?
Okay. Well, maybe. All right. So we'll leave this point sort of open, that there appear to be references to a thing that resembles the shroud. Yeah. Did you want to move on to?
There is a literary pedigree that's sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but people do talk about a shroud like this all the way back to Edessa, and that was a place in the Byzantine Empire. Yeah. And there are different theories about whether this refers to that.
Well, hang on. Wait a second. If people are talking about it for this long, that in itself, like now again, we have a model for the shroud going back that long. So
no, you're wrong, because the shroud itself, without the photo negative, is very faint and hard to. It's very difficult to even see the image. Like you have to be within 1 meter to like 5 meters to even see it in its plain reality. Like until the photo negatives in 1902 were there, nobody even knew it had this deep 3-dimensional anatomically accurate image.
Okay. I'm just not seeing like any kind of connection here still. Like I'm seeing vague references to
I'll give you more connection. So the limestone on the shroud and the pollen on the shroud goes to Jerusalem and Edessa. So if it's a medieval forgery, it's not going to be there.
It's dated.
It's cut by the length of cubits. That's a measurement that wasn't used in Europe. It's a linen shroud. Like Europe was not big into linen. Like it's a cumulative case. Like you're taking a cumulative case here. It's not going to be one piece of evidence that's going to overwhelmingly convince you. You're going to have to look at the thing in totality.
Well, I mean, you're not really producing evidence, though. Like you're saying a bunch of things that seem to operate in its favor, but at the same time, you're not actually directly linking it concretely to an object going back to the time of Christ, right?
Well, they've actually done lots of dating on it besides the carbon dating.
Who's they?
Well, scientists who published.
I need to know who the scientists are. You can't just tell me scientists.
Look, man, just as you came onto this stream without any preparation, I came on to it without.
Yes, but the difference is that you solicited the debate, so I'm anticipating you to have something to back this up.
Let me finish. So I was willing to come on the stream on research I've done years ago, right? So I don't have the names in front of me, right? So anyway, so you can find this in any standard YouTube lecture on shroud. Like if you want to do further research, so the thing is made of linen. That's made from flax. It's a plant material, so they're able to date it based on the it's called vanillin and lignin. These are things that dissipate from flax over time. So they're able to show that it has a certain amount of vanillin and lignin in it that puts it at a date much earlier than the carpet dating. And there's been huge disputes about the carpet dating. So eventually we're going to have to talk carbon dating here. So maybe we move to that now.
Hang on.
I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of curious, like what threshold would convince you, because obviously this is just a artifact. Like you're not going to get a deductive proof here. So you want to play the skeptic. Like what would actually convince you that this is accurate?
I would need a substantial and specific literature. I would basically need evidence that cannot be provided. This is simply an unprovable. Like this
okay,
is.
So let's not try to prove it. Let's just take probability. What's the probability of this artifact existing with the qualities that it has?
I can't give you a number without just pulling something out of my ass. Like I don't
sure,
have.
But you're talking about something that has had $100 billion spent trying to reproduce it or understand it. It's not a piece of art.
There are copies of the Bible on the moon. That in itself does not stand as an argument. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. What?
I said there are copies of the Bible on the moon. It doesn't particularly matter that people have spent a lot of money trying to prove.
Well, there aren't. I mean, as far as we know, there are not any copies of the Bible on the moon.
There are digital copies of the Bible on the moon. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Here, I'll show you.
Just tell me. I can't move away from Chrome here. I'll
Yeah,
lose
yeah, yeah,
connection.
that's fine. I'm just yeah, I know there was an auction 3 years ago. Rare lunar Bible to visit the moon is up for auction. Like this is money. Money gets put into performative stuff
What are
for
you
religious
saying? What are
purposes.
you telling me that somebody went on eBay and made a joke?
I'm saying the fact. I'm saying the fact that millions or however much money was allocated towards investigating the shroud is not in itself an argument for
Well,
anything.
you realize, of course, you realize that there are lots of skeptics who would like to refute the shroud. So they go to great lengths to try to reproduce it with our current
I don't want to refute
abilities.
the
Right?
shroud. I just don't see how it's
No, I don't
relevant.
mean you.
It's a
I
yeah.
don't mean you're. I'm not saying you're interested in refuting the shroud. I'm saying that lots of people are interested in refuting it, and they've
I don't think
tried. They
that
tried to.
I don't think they're that interested though. I think for the most part it's just kind of treated as silly because it
No,
doesn't really
that's not
do
right.
anything
That's
for
not
you.
right. That isn't right at all. There are people who are engaged in very rigorous efforts to replicate it, to show that it could be man-made. Like,
Uh-huh.
and people have claimed they've come close. They've like heated up a statue and scorched images on it. Like
Do you
they've
do
done
you
all types.
do you know the names of anybody who has been doing this?
Yeah. Well, if you just Google replication on the shroud, you get some Italian names. Yeah, scientists like mainstream,
Okay,
credentialed
well,
scientists.
right. So the reason why I'm asking for names is because I wanted some semblance of an idea that we have some like specific pedigree of who has been doing what kinds of tests and how, and have these been
Well,
um
after the STERF team, you had the carbon dating, and those are both major mainstream, easily
yeah, but the
verifiable tests.
the
Now,
SERP team
after
established.
that,
Well, hang on.
after those two tests, you have like lots of independent researchers trying to prove or disprove it. Yeah. And
Okay,
a lot
but
of them are in Italy. So yeah.
fine. But the but the SERP team only established that it was a shroud covering the man, and I'm
Well,
willing
they
to
established
concede that.
much more than that. They established that it's human blood. They established it's not a piece of
Yes,
art.
that's the
There's no
man part.
paint.
That's the
There's
man
no
part
paint
though.
on
That's
it.
the no, but that's the part that establishes that it's a shroud covering a man. Is the fact that it's real human blood.
No, it's been determined to be real blood. Yeah, hemoglobin. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I'm not arguing that. But my point is like that's what the analysis found. Is it's a shroud that covered a human body. It's like okay, now
Well, a
you
lot of people have been in shrouds over history, but none of them have a ghostly image of a crucified man with a wound in his side and a crown of thorns, and the image is 1 nanometer in depth of the shroud, and it has three dimensional properties, and it's photo negative. Like it's a cumulative set of properties that are unreproducible.
okay, so I'm going to go over. I'm just on Wikipedia again because you don't have specific studies here, so I can't analyze those. But the
Well,
analysis
they're
of a
easy to
crucified.
find.
Hang on. The analysis of a crucified Roman discovered near Venice in 2007 shows heel wounds that are consistent with those found in a Yohanan. Oh, I'm getting that wrong. Which are not consistent with the wounds depicted on the shroud. Also, neither of the crucifixion victims known to archaeology show evidence of wrist wounds. Joe Nicola in 1983 and Gregory St. Paul in 2007 separately state the proportions of the image are not realistic. The face and proportions of the shroud image are impossible. That the figure cannot represent that of an actual person, that the posture is inconsistent. They argue that the forehead. In 2018, an experimental bloodstain pattern analysis performed to study the behavior of blood flows from the wounds of a crucified person and to compare this to the evidence in the Turin shroud. The comparison between different tests demonstrated that the blood patterns on the forearms and on the back of the hand are not connected and would have had to have occurred at different times as a result of very specific sequence of movements. In addition, the rivulets in the front of the image are not consistent with the lines in the lumbar area, even supposing that there might have been different episodes of bleeding at different times. These inconsistencies suggest that the Turin linen was an artistic or quote-unquote didactic representation rather than an authentic burial shroud, in which case you could then take the insights of the SERP group to point out that they used either real blood simply or real human blood. I don't know if they actually determined that it was human blood. So
Yeah, I'm familiar with what you're referencing there. There
right.
was that particular paper that tried to challenge certain elements of it, but
I mean, you're
there's
treating it as if, well, hang on. It's not tried to challenge. It's in the other way. You have a piece of fabric that, when scientists have looked at the material, say that this cannot possibly.
That's just one paper, right?
No, I've gone over like several references. Let's actually
No,
look through these.
the one you just referenced. That's one paper by one or whatever body. It's a singular paper, right? So there are responses to that, and there are
There's a
counter
few
papers.
here. So there's a report on the Shroud of Turin by John H. There's the BPA approach to Shroud of Turin by Matteo Brenner, PhD. Journal of Forensic Science. There's the Paul Gregory thing, Shroud of Turin, the Great Gothic Art Fraud. Like there's more than one paper on this.
Of course, there's thousands. There are thousands.
But what I was just talking about referenced more than one paper.
No, there are thousands on both sides. Sure, we're not having a paper debate here. We're not throwing papers at each other that neither of us have read. Right? We're talking about the Shroud as two people who are not experts. So
no, I understand
papers,
that, but
it's not going to do anything.
Okay, but given that I have no reason whatsoever to doubt the integrity of these particular experts, because
well, then by the same token, you'd have no reason to doubt the integrity of the proponents of the Shroud. So it's just a wash.
I don't know who those are.
Well, they'll look them up instead of looking up the counterclaims. Then you'd know.
Yes, but I'm talking to you right now, and I was
okay. So
I'll
give you an example.
Hang on.
I'll give you an example. So for example, Rogers was one of the STIR project guys who basically totally rejected the authenticity of the Shroud after the carbon dating. And then once he examined Sue Benford's studies, he came back and said, yeah, it is authentic. So you can look up Rogers. So then you'll have countervailing source there. So you haven't read these papers. I haven't read them. You're just Googling like countervailing papers. That's not going to settle this discussion because it's not a discussion where we've read all the studies, right?
But given that you're arguing the affirmative, I would have expected you to have something specific, right? If you're giving me notions
my whole question was, why do atheists, the original question was, why do atheists who demand physical evidence have no knowledge about the actual physical evidence that's been proffered? I have no problem defending the Shroud from memory. But,
honestly, you're not going to like the answer. It's because life's too short and it's inherently silly. Like, we're not going to stake the existence.
So if life's too short, you just don't.
Hey, stop talking for a second.
Sure.
Life's too short. We're talking about a person whose existence and biography are largely beyond any sort of careful critical scrutiny, except for an exegetical analysis of some texts that are admittedly contradictory in some respects. And they don't get you to the positive argument for the existence of God in any case. So why on earth would you waste your time, again, on a piece of fabric that has been determined by scientists we have no reason to distrust, to not be connectable to this figure?
Well, in the first place, we may have good reason to distrust them. Their whole tack might be just to try to refute this thing. So you don't even know anything about these figures. Like you just glanced them for the first time on Google. That was just the first part of my answer. So you have no idea of the pedigree of these scientists. You have no idea of the responses to their papers. You have no idea if it's peer reviewed. You're just Googling stuff. Now, in the second place, like if you think life is just too short to answer physical evidence for the resurrection of Christ through the Shroud, then just don't bring it up. Don't say there's no physical evidence.
That would be
if life's too short. Hang on, I'm not done. I'm not done.
Yes, but you were on my
I'm not done with my statement.
show.
Well,
That's
no,
fine.
I thought this was going to be an even back and forth.
You've talked quite a bit. You've talked quite a bit.
Let me just sum it up. Let me just take 10 seconds to sum up my point. Yeah, so if you're just saying life's too short to examine the physical evidence, then it's silly to demand physical evidence and then not examine it.
Mm-hmm. That would be a better retort if you would actually come with specific citations to this debate, because you didn't care either.
Well, that was never the nature of the debate. We just came here to talk about it in a facile way, and people can do their further research on papers if they want to.
Okay, sure, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, this just isn't compelling. Like, there's
I'm not here to compel you. Like you came on a stream without. You came on a stream without any prior knowledge of this. I'm giving you a basic rundown of what proponents of the Shroud say. It's up to you if you want to take the time to look into it later. Like, that's not my job.
Okay, fair enough. Well, why do you think that what you told me so far should indicate that I should be bothering to look into the Shroud further?
Well, if you're one of you came here to defend a position that no one else was willing to defend. That if you're going to claim that you want physical evidence, then you have to examine the physical evidence, and this is the physical evidence.
That doesn't mean you have to be what's the word I want here? That doesn't mean you have to be just sort of openly, equally invested in every single supernatural claim that exists, and therefore carefully scrutinize all of the physical evidence presented by everybody for those things.
But that's not what this is. This is a unique artifact that has had massive public interest and massive amounts of money trying to replicate and understand it. And the only scientific team that ever analyzed it is STIRP, and they've said that we have no idea how the image was formed. We cannot replicate it. It
So
is not a piece
not
of
hang
art.
on. So not that wide public interest, surely, if only one team has ever analyzed it.
Well, I mean, the Vatican is very careful with who they allow to touch such an artifact. So they were willing to allow a team of like the very top flight professionals of the time. They only gave them a week or two, and you had top photographers, top forensics people. You had the very top of the field at the time, and then they allowed laboratories to date it. So there were these two scientific analyses of the thing,
Right.
and other people have made other attempts. But it's not something that people can just put their hands on. It's a relative devotion.
Right. So to be clear, what you just said is that there has been only one serious test of it, and it found that it was dated to about 1,000 years ago.
Well, there's been there's been other.
Under 1,000 years.
I understand where you come from. Where you come from, because I said there were only two major scientific analyses of this, but there have been refutations of the carbon dating. But you'd have to be interested in the subject to actually analyze them and develop an opinion on it, right?
Well, the issue,
I can't force you to be interested in it.
I'm not disputing that, but if you're going to you have to give me a reason to be interested in the first place.
Sure. And well, let me give you a reason. Let me give you a reason to be interested. Okay. So have you ever heard of the VP8 image analyzer that was applied to the Shroud during the STIRP tests or shortly thereafter? All right. So the VP8 image analyzer was a piece of technology that was developed to analyze photographs of the moon and determine the depth of craters and mountains and so on. So basically a 3D imager that can determine simply from an image what the depth is. And when you run a regular photograph or drawing or painting through the VP8 image analyzer, you get distortions. It does not look like the original art. When you run the Shroud through the VP8 image analyzer, you actually have very clear three-dimensional characteristics of the Shroud, where it actually looks more real. It's the way the image is actually formed on the Shroud is such that it has 3D information engrafted in it.
Okay.
You could actually see a 3D image of the Shroud man, like the way the cloth would have lain over him. And nobody's been able to explain that since.
Well, I'm not disputing that the Shroud wasn't a piece of cloth that was actually over a man. Now, it appears that people are actually arguing that there are reasons to think this wasn't the case. But if I grant you that again, that part doesn't concern me. The interest in the Shroud lies in the fact that you can tie this to the existence of Christ in particular. Not that you can say, well, isn't it weird that this resembles the features that we have received of Christ's body after his death? This.
All right. So let's play a game here. So let's say I've given you a certain amount of data. I have a certain amount of data. What is the best explanation for the existence of this artifact?
The best explanation for the existence of this artifact, granting what I've granted you, is that there was a body that was
the information we've shared.
Yeah, there was a body that had the characteristics that you described that was wrapped in a shroud, and now we have the Shroud.
And it had a crown of thorns. It had a side wound.
How do you determine that there's wait? Now there's a crown of thorns. How do we determine there's a crown of thorns?
Well, because you could actually see from the blood flows that there's blood running all over the man's head.
Did not the man in the Shroud of Turin have hair?
I'm sorry, what?
The man in the Shroud, he had hair, right? He's depicted as having a beard and having hair.
But the blood flows on the Shroud have nothing to do with the image. They're independent.
Okay, but you misunderstand me. The blood flow from a crown of thorns is going to be irrevocably obscured by the presence of hair that's going to be washing it about.
Not at all. No, the image does not exist where the blood flow is, right? So I understand this is your first acquaintance with this artifact.
Hang on, wait. No, stop. So the image does not exist on the head of the Shroud of Turin where the crown of thorns was.
Not at all. That's not what I said. Let me try to explain to you, because it's your first glance at this object, right? So the image that is embedded in the uppermost fibrils of the linen does not exist under the blood. The blood is first.
Okay.
If you were to scrape all the blood off, there's no image under the blood. The image came after the blood.
Okay, I think you're misunderstanding my question here. I'm asking, how have you determined that the blood where the crown of thorns would be is from a crown of thorns?
Well, you don't actually necessarily see a crown because that was long gone before the body was.
No, I
beshaded,
understand
right?
that, but what I'm saying is from
Well,
the
you
from
see
the
blood
pattern of
flow.
the.
You see blood flow over the head. Whoa! That's
I'm finishing my thought. Yes.
Go on.
When, how do you determine from the blood flow, wherever you have found it, that it came from a crown of thorns in particular?
Well, yeah, I'd be willing to admit that you can't prove distinctively that there's a crown.
Then,
In fact,
okay, but you're citing.
nobody on the Christian side even considers it like, typically in art you see like a very
Okay,
you see a very petite or dainty crown. What most scholars think now is that it was just basically a bunch of thorns that were just hammered into his head. So you see blood flows from the head, and that's what's significant, because in a normal Roman execution, that has nothing to do with blood flows through the head. Just as you don't normally see a side wound in a typical Roman execution.
Again, so there's a million different problems with this, though, because some people have said, again, the wounds took place at different times. B, the wounds could be from transportation of the body or taking it down. Like, who even knows? There are so many different things that could account for that blood there. I don't know why we're inferring a crown of thorns or thorns, period. You just have blood where the head is.
It's consistent with a representation of Christ, right? So a typical Roman execution is not going to have, all these blood flows from the top of the head, whereas in the case of Christ, you do have that. Same with the side wound. Same with the fact that in typical Roman executions, they break the shins so that the person can no longer uphold themselves on their legs, and they asphyxiate from hanging by their arms on the cross. Whereas in the case of Christ,
do we know? Well, slow down. Do we know if that's universally the case?
I don't know if we know it's universally the case, but
okay. So hang on. So listen.
Typically, the purpose of an execution by crucifixion is that they have a long, drawn-out torture, sometimes lasting days or more.
That assumes.
In the case of the narrative of Christ, the Roman soldier came up and said, "He's dead."
Okay,
we'll take the spear. We'll take the spear.
I get you. Listen.
Shove it into his side.
I'm not interrupting you to bully you. It's just that when I give like a 5-second reply, you respond with like 30 seconds of exposition.
You're asking questions, so the answers are necessarily more.
Okay, fine. But the problem you're running into again is that all of these little gaps where it's like, well, it could be, we just don't know. These are gaps that you don't overcome by just saying, well, it could be consistent. Like that doesn't work. Like, for example, with the broken legs thing, with the broken legs thing. Like, we don't have verification that every single crucifixion victim had their legs broken. We have no way of ascertaining that.
Well, you'd have
for God's sake, like if we were
executions, you'd have to study the subject of Roman crucifixions to know how frequently they broke the shins to kill them. Yeah.
Do you know?
Not offhand, I don't, but my understanding from years of.
Okay, well, how about this? Would you be confident saying that it was over 50% of victims had their legs broken?
Yes, I would.
Okay, how about over 60%?
I don't know. I mean,
you don't know. Okay, so we are in. Yes, I understand. So we are in the dark. Let's say, because it only has to be 1%, right? Let's say that it's possible that 1% of victims were either executed incompetently, or there were just, I don't know, there were regional variations in practices with whatever garrison or whatever was conducting the execution. Again, that means that we have no reason to infer from the fact that the legs weren't broken, apparently from the shroud, that this therefore was Christ. Like, this doesn't follow.
Let me try to take a few steps back. Instead of focusing in narrowly, focus highly.
Digital Gnosis says it was almost all the time their shins were bashed in. Okay.
Yeah, so he knows. So I mean, he's more confident than I am, and this is years since I. Let me step back and take the telescope from close in and bring it back out. So you're talking about certain characteristic features of the shroud. When taken cumulatively, it's obviously a representation of Christ, whether it's fake or not. So you're talking about the blood flows from the crown of thorns. You're talking about the side wound that's unique to Christ. You're talking about the shins are not broken. You're talking about that it's a Jewish linen shroud, it's measured by the measurements of their time. Some people have dated it to the 1st century. They've got the pollen. They've got the linen. hang on, I'm not finished. So they have the limestone that's unique to Jerusalem. They have the whole pedigree of the history of the shroud. It was preserved for a certain reason. There's a ghostly image on it that nobody can replicate. I mean, when you take it in concert, when you take the whole thing cumulatively, it's obviously a representation of Christ, even if it's fake. And once you rule out art, then you're really narrowed down to what the heck happened here. Like, how did they get a representation of Christ that's not art, that we cannot replicate? What is this object? So I'm just saying it's a good piece of additional evidence on top of the general resurrection evidence.
How do you defend the contention that these features were unique to Christ? Granting everything you've just said.
Sure, because a typical Roman execution by crucifixion is not
Okay,
going
see, that
to
word
have...
typical, that word typical is crucial, because typical means not all, right? When digital gnosis says almost all the time their shins were bashed in, that is introducing an area of uncertainty. Almost. Sure. We don't have the bodies.
Right. So you're asking about the unique properties of the shroud that point us to Jesus Christ, right? So
I'm asking you how they point us to Jesus Christ.
I could just re-enumerate them as I've already done so, right? So
please don't.
This particular... Okay.
Okay. So again, like they're as soon as I push a little bit, there's a black box saying almost or typically or whatever. Like, this doesn't help us. We have a poverty of information about this time period when it comes to these things. We don't have the bodies.
Very few people doubt that this is a representation of Christ on either side of the debate. So I don't know how long we want to get bogged down and talking about whether this is supposed to be Christ. Like, that is something that everybody almost admits.
You think everybody almost admits that what do you mean by a representation of Christ? There's a lot being packed into that.
People who are skeptical of the shroud don't typically say it's not supposed to represent Jesus Christ. They will make other objections. They'll say it's a forgery or a piece of art. They're not saying that this was just some random crucifixion victim who happened to imprint a photo 3D negative on a shroud that happened to be preserved for 2,000 years.
Okay, no, but hang on. You would be talking about people on either side of a dispute over whether or not it is a forgery. That would be assuming on both sides that it's a representation of Christ. The question is,
right? So again, there's very few.
Hang on. No.
But random crucifixion victim.
Okay, but the SERP group you just cited didn't specify Christ. In fact, they explicitly said it's unknown.
Of course, it's always going to be unknown in terms of 100% certainty, but there's very little dispute going on about whether this is supposed to represent Christ or not. The dispute is primarily whether it's genuine. It's not about that it's supposed to represent Christ. I mean, you even have like his beard torn out, like that. These are all things that go to the gospel. Like, this is not a random Roman crucifixion person.
He has his beard torn out now.
Well, I hadn't mentioned that.
How does the shroud show this? Okay, well, why don't you elaborate?
Well, in other words, like those people who I mentioned earlier, like the forensics and anatomy people who have said that this is a perfect anatomical representation of a person, they say that, like, you could actually see in the photo negative or a blown up one, that you could see that the beard is torn out. That goes right back to the narrative in the gospel.
Let's look at this.
Tore his hair out of his face. So. And also a typical Roman crucifixion victim is not going to have 70 or 100 or whatever flagrant marks in their back. That is particular to the gospel narrative.
Okay, I'm just going to share a screen.
And also, typical crucifixion victims are not buried in a shroud in a tomb. They're typically thrown in a pit, like Bart Ehrman would say.
All right, so this is the negative.
Yeah, look at that beautiful image. You telling me that's a piece of art? Show me the tradition of art that's from.
I didn't tell you it's a piece of art. I was conceding that
it was rhetorical. It was rhetorical.
Yeah. Okay. So,
you show me that tradition of art, I'd be very interested to see it.
That looks like a beard to me.
Well, you're not a forensics expert, right?
No, I'm not. But the forensics experts seem to be on my side here, so I'm not entirely certain.
Name two of them.
I don't need to name two of them. I said they seem to be on my side. I'm making a much more modest claim.
That's a much broader claim.
No, it's broader, but it's more modest. There is a modest and broad are not on a continuum with each other.
To say that all the forensics experts agree with you when you can't name one or two of them, it seems like a random claim that has no basis.
Well, I can pull them up if you like. I have them just here.
Yeah, pull them up. I want to hear five.
Sure. Yeah, sure, we'll do that.
I want to hear 5 forensic experts.
Cool.
I want to make sure they're a consensus or a majority. And I'm just kidding with you here. Just don't make claims that you have no basis for.
I make a claim. I said, judging from the thing I'm looking at right in front of me, it appears as though the forensics experts are on my side here.
I named two.
So let's, well, I'm going to find them. Just give me a moment.
Well, how do you already know they're on your side if you haven't found them yet?
Because I was just reading from them seconds ago. I didn't retain a memory of the name.
Okay.
Biological and medical forensics. Here we go. So let's see. There are several reddish stains in the shroud suggesting blood. It's uncertain whether these stains were produced at the same time as the image or afterwards. Macron, I believe these containing iron oxide, theorizing its presence was likely due to signal pigment materials used in medieval times. Skeptics cite forensic blood tests whose results dispute the authenticity of the shroud, point to the possibility that the blood could belong to a person who handled the shroud, and that the apparent blood flows in the shroud are unrealistically neat. So we'll open that up. I don't like skeptic as a medical examiner.
The founder of Wikipedia said this is not a reliable source, but I understand that's where we all go to.
What do you mean Wikipedia is not a reliable source?
Yeah, like the actual co-founder or the founder of Wikipedia said, like anything that's controversial, Wikipedia is not reliable on. It's just because.
Oh, sure, but I'm not relying on Wikipedia here. I'm just using it as a reference point to find the papers.
Of course, but you might have a biased set of references. That's all I'm saying. I don't mind that. We all go to Wikipedia, but when it comes to a highly controversial subject, they're always on the mainstream side. They never actually give a fair hand to the heterodox side, as according to the founder, not according to me.
Okay, maybe you can indulge me here then, because apparently we have a big conspiracy against the Shroud of Turin. Perhaps you can name off the top of your head somebody who would be motivated to corrupt the research into this specifically.
Well, yeah, I think this is I would say the whole scientific establishment, by and large, not everyone, but they would be very reluctant to admit that there's a plausibly supernatural artifact.
That's not what I asked. What I asked is, do you think that there is a large... who would be motivated to go into here and to put in specifically meticulously made false reports?
On Wikipedia, okay. Every basement dwelling, like pimple-faced idiot who edits Wikipedia would probably want to do.
But these have citations that refer to papers. I'm referring to these.
Well, I understand that, but like you can exclude good citations in favor and then bolster the citations against. Like that's what happens on Wikipedia. Well, I have no problem with you using any source you want. I'm just saying.
No, I understand that, but
we're getting. It's my fault, and we've detoured into something irrelevant. So
no, it's not. It's not actually irrelevant because again, like whether or not the construal of the papers on Wikipedia is trustworthy, they nonetheless link to articles that are reputable and are from reputable sources.
Absolutely, but they just might not include the counters, or they might not include the pros. You see what I mean?
Well, they're. Well, I mean, if we can go through and look at the abstracts, if you like, I think it's a waste of time.
Well, the abstracts have nothing to do with whether the Wikipedia editors are excluding positive articles that you don't.
No, we wouldn't be looking at Wikipedia at that point. I'd be looking to the articles themselves.
Yeah, I have nothing against the sources that they reference against the Shroud. I'm just saying they may be showcasing you a biased version of the actual sources, right? But again, that's my fault for bringing up. That's a detour. It's really not relevant to this.
Do you think they left the blood on the body before they put the shroud on? We were talking about them cleaning the body beforehand.
In terms of the gospel narrative, this was like the Passover, and it's for ritual purity reasons. They had to have this body down and buried. Yeah.
Okay. So hang on.
They cleaned the body. They put it in spices and myrrhs and aloes and stuff, and then they shrouded it. But it still has some blood flow after that.
Okay. So you can see the shroud image on your screen, right? I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I do see that.
Okay. So these are the blood flows. Yeah. These white things. These are the blood flow, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. If he's lying down, why would they be going down his forehead?
The white is not just the blood flow. It's, as I said before, like the image has depth to it. You could see lighter and darker shades.
Okay, but hang on. I was asking you a specific question.
Mm-hmm.
If they clean the body, so this blood flow would be post burial, which of course it would because it imprinted onto the shroud. Why is it going down his forehead as if gravity was working against it?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily going down. It could just be like, for example, you see the reverse 3 shape in the center of the forehead.
Sorry, let's look again.
Yep.
Where?
Sort of like a backwards 3. You see that one? I mean, we don't know if the wound was shaped like a 3 and just pustuled up, or if it flowed down. We don't know that from looking at the image.
You think he had a crown of thorns in his head and it traced a 3?
Well, it looks like a backward 3. Looks like a backward 3. I'm not saying it is a 3.
Okay. I mean,
I'm
it
just, I'm
starts.
just, I'm
It
just saying,
starts.
I'm just saying the wound could have that shape. It doesn't mean it flowed in that shape, right? So your question was, why does it flow if he's already been cleaned? Now I don't know that answer, but I mean, people have done work on this, and maybe they'd have better. Look, if I've sparked enough interest in you to like look into this further, you can read 1,000 papers. If not, then I'm just giving you a summary.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Given that this is an unfair debate, since neither of us are prepared, I will DM you when I've read 1,000 papers, and we can have this debate again.
Oh no. I don't expect you to actually do that. Well, my whole point from the beginning was like people laughed when I brought the Shroud up, and you don't even know anything about it. Like you have to know about it. Like if you're demanding physical evidence, you should actually look at the physical evidence.
Well, no, again, because even the description of Christ is tenuous, and the sources are contradictory. So, like,
what sources are contradictory? You mean like the pro and con?
Well, why don't you enumerate for us the full extent of the documentary sources for the existence and ministry of Christ?
Well, I would read. Oh wow! Now we're moving to the ministry. I thought we were talking about the Shroud.
We can say biography if you like. No, because the issue with the Shroud is that it doesn't connect to the biography of Christ regardless. You're making an inference. Maybe.
Seriously, I've already given you the reasons that it does. Like
you've given reasons. No. You've given reasons.
The artifact itself has that pedigree, and the scientific aspects of it were not known until hundreds of years later.
B3. No. You've listed reasons why you would infer a connection between the Christ figure of literature and the Shroud. You haven't actually given me a concrete reason to connect it to the man in time and history. And so what I'm asking you is,
I see where you're going.
Yeah.
But I did, though. I said that the Shroud is dated by 4 or 5 different methods to the 1st century. It's actually located with Jerusalem and Edessa, with the limestone and the pollens and so on. So if you want to, I mean, those are purely physical evidences that this thing has the pedigree that was claimed for it.
Carbon dating takes it to 1390 AD at the latest, 1260 at the earliest.
We haven't really tackled the carbon dating issue, and that is a big issue. But most, even people who are on the carbon dating team, say it's an imperfect method, and later datings have called it into question. So at a minimum, it's in deep question.
That is over 1,000 years margin of error.
Now, did you hear what I said? I'm saying people who were actually on the carbon dating teams have come out subsequently and said this is not necessarily.
The most recent analysis from 2020 concludes the stated date range needs to be adjusted by up to 88 years in order to properly meet the requirement of 95% confidence.
I don't know what you're reading from.
There are 5 sources attributed to this. There is Riani et al. From Statistics and Computing, regression analysis with partially labeled regressors, carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin. We have Casabianca et al. Radiocarbon dating of the Turin Shroud, new evidence from the raw data from archaeometry. We have Journal of Archaeological Science, Walsh et al. An instructive interlaboratory comparison, 1988 radiocarbon dating of the Shroud of Turin. The most skeptical analyses of this from reputable sources seem to indicate that yes, it is not accurate to the century.
How are you defining reputable other than it's listed on Wiki?
These are cited from journals. Do you want to pull one up?
I'm not saying they're not from journals. I'm saying you made the claim that the only reputable sources. I'm saying, how do you know that when you're relying on whatever wiki is showing you?
Because you can't bring up any other ones.
Well, I'm not going to in the context of this like prima facie debate, but I'm not saying there aren't any. If you go to shroud.com, you'll find hundreds of papers from credentialed scientists, peer reviewed. They're just not going to be on wiki.
Okay, what in your estimation makes somebody a credentialed scientist?
Having the proper credentials in the field and going through a peer-reviewed process for the publication, obviously.
Okay, so break that down for me. What do those things mean to you?
Well, a PhD in the particular field from an accredited university. For the first part,
the particular field in this case, the particular field in this case would be something like archaeology or something.
No, it depends on what avenue we're talking about. If you're talking about blood flows, it would be anatomy. It would be forensic pathology. If you're talking about pollen or limestone, it's going to be geology. It's going to be, the entire case for the Shroud is cumulative, and it's based on areas of expertise that are ranging far and wide.
What I'm getting at here is that it seems like it seems like you're gesturing vaguely at the existence of people with degrees who reference each other. That in itself is not sufficient. It has to be peer reviewed by, again, people in respectable and reputable journals. Yeah, I understand that.
I'm the one who said peer reviewed. I don't know why you're bringing that as an objection.
Because I think your conception of what peer reviewed means is a little bit impoverished. It doesn't just mean you have peers.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that? Why do you think, of all people, I wouldn't know what peer review means? Like, you've talked to me for a number of hours, so don't you think I know what peer review means?
I've talked to you for 1 hour.
Well, today, but I mean, you also talked to me on the previous debate stream.
Oh, is that you?
That was me.
Oh God, don't even get me started on that.
Oh no, let's not get started on that.
Oh God,
that was a fun time. No, but let's take for granted the carbon dating. What would it convince you that an artifact is not properly carbon dated? Like, let's say they have a separate dating method that's even more sure, like the lignin or the vanillin in the flax. Like, if that shows clearly that it's at least from the 3rd century AD, and that confutes or confounds the carbon dating, then how do you determine between the two forms of dating?
Why? Hang on. So
if the organic dating of the lignin and the vanillin in the flax, of which the linen is made, shows that it cannot be as recent as the Middle Ages, then at what point do you say that the carbon was wrong? Like, how do you demarcate between, or how do you adjudicate between these two dating types that are in contradiction to each other?
Can you clarify for me what this other dating is exactly? Like,
where
are you getting this from?
It's called vanillin and lignin. These are things that are in the organic substance of linen from the flaxseed, from the flax plant. And over time, you expect certain amounts of vanillin and lignin to be in a shroud. If it's 1,000 years old, it's 1,000 years. And so if the date was actually 1300, then you would have the presence of lignin or vanillin, and you don't have that. So now you have two different dating methods that are in conflict. How do you adjudicate between them?
I don't know. I'd have to look more into that. I just
exactly
don't know.
Exactly. You'd have to actually have a glancing familiarity with the subject that you debate. Which is not to mean, I'm not meaning that insultingly, because I'm not an expert either, but I'm just telling you the things that I've read.
But that's the problem, though. You're not telling me the things that you've read. You're giving me a report that you've read some things that say so and so.
What I would suggest is, you know who Gary Habermas is, right?
The name rings a bell. I don't know though.
Right. So he's a New Testament scholar. He's like the main minimal facts guy. He's like one of the bigger minimal facts guy. Serious scholar, PhD. So also William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig himself is a proponent of the Shroud.
I'm familiar with William Lane Craig. So here's where I was getting at with the peer review thing, right? Anybody can get a PhD, and there's a reason why you specify academically reputable sources, like specific journals and things like that, because again, anybody can get a PhD and form a community of people that reference each other. This is the thing that happens.
Well, that's a sword that cuts both ways, because all you're doing is plucking names from a Wikipedia article. You haven't read any papers.
Well, one of the ways in which you would determine the trustworthiness of a source is whether or not it has built-in specific political or religious or ideological or monetary reasons for pushing a certain interpretation of facts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would just recommend you go to shroud.com. It's basically a collection of everything that ever comes out on the Shroud, and that's for a follow-up debate. We did this on a 5-minute notice, right? So I mean, obviously, you can't expect me to come here prepared with 100 papers.
Well, why don't we just go there right now?
Any more than I expect you to have read the papers you're citing. You haven't read those papers.
Okay, but can you remember even any of the titles of any of the papers that you're using as your source here, or do you just peruse this every so often?
I already mentioned to you Rogers. He was on the STRF team, and he changed his mind when the carbon dating came out. He was a skeptic. He actually called Sue Benford and her husband crazy for that's the lunatic fringe. You still believe in the Shroud? And then he was changed his mind for a second or third time there.
This was pertaining to the question of whether or not the Shroud actually made contact with a man and wasn't a work of art.
Well, that was the thing that I was referring to just there with Sue Benford and Mr. Rogers, I guess his name was.
What I'm saying.
Dating.
What I'm asking, though, for clarification is that the change of his mind concerned whether or not the shroud was authentically a shroud covering a body.
No, it was his change of mind was about whether the carbon dating was from a portion of the shroud that was reliably not like added on later as a patch or a repair or something like that.
So hang on. So the portion of the shroud they carbon dated was a patch.
Well, yeah, they took it from the sides where well, you have to know a little bit about the history of the shroud. Like, of course, it's a very old artifact, so there were repairs done to the frayed edges. So the there's lots of peer-reviewed papers where they show that the portions that were taken to be tested had cotton weavings in there, and like stitchings that were.
Has anybody carbon dated the other parts of the shroud?
Well, the problem is that actually they have, but the Vatican is obviously very tight with the shroud, so they haven't done an official. You're going to have to rely at this point on individuals.
But there was an unofficial one done.
Yeah, people still had remnants of. You're going to have to trust them, or you can't take it as official.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem for me. So
yeah,
I think
I already gave you other dating methods that are easy that have been done, like the vanillin and the lignin and the Jerusalem pollen. And if this was a medieval forgery,
I just can't stress enough though. I can't stress enough though that at the end of the day, the only thing you've been able to refer me to, following a bunch of statements that are just frankly uncited, is to a website called Shroud.com. Well,
that would be the place that can collects all of the scientific publications on it. It's not really? A blog.
You're sure there's no bias? You're sure they're not excluding contrary material?
I'll tell you about the guy who runs Shroud.com. His name is Barry Schwartz, and he was the photographer that the Stirp team hired to do the photography on the shroud. And he was a atheistic Jew. He was Jewish and he was an atheist. And he's like, "Why the hell are you dragging me onto the Shroud team?" And they said, "Well, we want accurate people to come and the best in their field." And Barry Shroud continues to this day to not be a Christian, but he thinks the shroud is absolutely authentic.
Well,
he's the one who
again. Well, hang on.
He's the one who collects all of the data on Shroud.com.
Authentic in what respect? Like
authentic in the respect that it is the genuine burial cloth of Christ, even if he doesn't give any idea of how it formed the image and so on. Nobody knows how it formed. There's different theories. Like there's theories from skeptics and there's theories from proponents. Nobody knows how this image formed on the shroud. There's nothing like it in history. There's nothing like it in art. I don't know if I've stressed that enough. Like this is a 3-dimensional photo negative on the uppermost fibrils out of like 100 nanometers. It's like thinner than 100th of a hair. And it has 3-dimensional properties and it has photonegative properties. Like this is unheard of in history.
Okay, who collected the shroud after Christ died, or after the tomb was left?
There is a vast literary tradition of references to it. But it was often
presumably
it was often hidden. Like, and then supposedly what happened?
No, you misunderstand me. Like, let's. I'm just curious as to what the genealogy is here.
Sure.
So presumably,
I'll give you that as best as I remember.
Presumably, Christ walks out of the tomb. Presumably, I don't know if he's still wearing the shroud or wearing something else or not.
Well, he's not in the shroud. It's a burial shroud. So if he's up and walking, he's not in a shroud.
Fair enough. Okay, so the shroud would have been presumably left in the tomb behind him.
Yes, the Gospel of John talks about the burial clothes. Yeah.
Okay, so who took the shroud out?
That would have been probably his Peter or one of the followers who went into the tomb, according to the Gospel. Assuming it's authentic, one of those guys would have grabbed it.
Right, and then where did it go?
Well, the first mention after that goes to like a King Akbar.
Oh wait, hang on. Wait. There's a mention to somebody collecting the shroud?
No, within the first 3 centuries of Christianity, there is a king of Edessa named.
Okay. So just for clarification, then, so the initial removal of the shroud from the tomb, we have no idea who did that.
Well, I think in John it says they collected his things, but they were under persecution for many decades after that, so they may have hidden it, right? So that's not unheard of. You're not going to get a chain of custody for the shroud like the way you suggest. It suggests to me you want some perfect chain of custody. You're obviously not going to get that for a historical artifact.
I'd want some kind of chain of custody.
Well, I'm giving you some kind. I'm saying that as early as the 3rd century, they're talking about this ghostly image on this full-bodied shroud. There's depictions of it from the first millennium. Like it's long before the Middle Age date that you get from the carbon date. Not only that, but the people in the artistic, like scholars of art, have shown that the original depictions of Christ in the first 30, 40, 50 years, like on Roman, like mosaics and stuff, they were a man with short hair with no beard. But all of a sudden, in like the 3rd century, the entire depiction of Christ changes to match the shroud. It goes to a long-haired bearded man. So the entire iconography and artistic depiction of Christ radically changes. Around that time when the shroud was first mentioned or shown or found or what.
Like there's just so many problems here. Like I have to no, we don't have time for that. I have to grant you so much credulity even to get, oh my God, even to grant that the shroud wasn't a forgery in some respect. Like I have to imagine on the basis solely of a lack of evidence, frankly.
No, that's not correct. That's not correct, because neither of us know if it's real or a fraud. So if you want to claim it's a fraud, you need some evidence. Or
I'm not even claiming it's a fraud. I'm not even claiming it's a fraud.
But I'm saying the default position is neutral. Like if you want it to be a fraud, you're going to have to explain to me how a person in the Middle Ages can make an anatomically perfect 3D photo negative image with the proper blood flows, proper anatomy, knowledge of how people were crucified.
It is far from clear to me. Okay, but hang on. I only need to explain those things if I can see that those those are actually effective arguments in favor of it being authentically the shroud cover.
And I realize that there may be people who dispute those, and I realize this is the first time
it's not just. Well, hang on. Look, even with just what you've told me, like these are things that can have myriad different explanations, and not only
anything can have myriad different explanations. The point is, what is the best explanation?
Yeah, but I'm not. Okay, well, first of all, I would deny that the best explanation is a conjecture to one that happens to link it to a literary figure that you have an emotional connection to. But secondly,
I was convinced of the shroud.
Hang on. But secondly, I'm not under any obligation whatsoever to leap to a final explanation of this particular artifact. I can hold that in suspension for as long as I like.
Nobody's asked you to do that.
I mean, you're asking me what the best explanation is in the total absence of
no, I didn't ask you. I didn't ask you for the best explanation. I said the relevant thing is what is the best explanation. Now, if you're not in a position to judge that for yourself, then that would take much more research.
Fine, but the characteristics, frankly, of a shroud linked to a figure who we only have a literary reference to, and not perfectly, by the way, and even the descriptions that I'm seeing of the shroud itself indicate that there are problems with this.
Only by Googling skeptics. You didn't Google proponents.
You're not giving me any names of proponents. I have no reason to take these proponents seriously so
far.
Well,
I didn't come here to do that. That wasn't the point. This is a basic presentation of the case of the shroud. You can watch dozens of documentaries. You can.
Well, I was told that you said that you wanted to debate. So
no, I was concerned. No, what happened was I was in the Discord chat and everyone was like mocking the shroud, but none of them were. They were all saying, "Nathan, help us! Nathan, help us!" And then you showed up and said, "I'll debate it."
Somebody said that you wanted to debate, so
no, I was willing to. I came there just to ask the question: why do people who demand physical evidence of Christ dismiss it out of hand without actually knowing anything about it?
Well, I mean, you say here,
Go on.
You say here, well, if you guys can't debate it live, referring to the Shroud of Turin, I guess ask Nathan. I just asked out of curiosity, and then Blue said, I'm not sure if President Sam would be willing to debate that, and I agreed. So, I mean, you were fishing for
and you've been totally fair and totally on board, like above board. I have no complaints at all about the way you've handled the debate.
No, I understand, but you're missing my point here. If you are making the positive assertion that the shroud connects to Christ, and I'm just not seeing sufficient reason to believe that.
I think that's generally accepted by the skeptics and the proponents alike, that this is an image of Christ, even if it's fake.
Well, no, because we already know that there are people who don't accept it's an image of Christ and believe that it's
there are, but then there's also Richard Carrier and Robert Price, but it doesn't matter. Like the vast bulk of people studying the shroud on either side say, obviously, it's a representation of Christ.
Okay, it's just like you have to understand this is really suspect to me that the only people you can bring up are basically popular apologetics and popular people responding to those.
I didn't bring up to anyone from apologetics.
I mean, you brought up William Lane Craig, somebody he cited. You brought up Richard Carrier. I think it's about it.
Yeah,
I can't remember the name of anybody except for Rogers from the SERP team.
Well, Rogers is not a popular apologist. He's a scientist on the surface.
No, I know that. That was the exception.
As far as Habermas and Langtry, the only reason I brought them up is to show you that people who are credentialed PhDs from accredited, important institutions, are very much persuaded that the Shroud may well be authentic. It's not a fringe position. It's not a religious position. This is
okay. Well,
like I also mentioned Barry Schwartz. He's not a Christian. He's still a Jew, and he still thinks.
I know, but I'm not concerned with people being Christians or whatever. That's not material to the argument here. However, I guess just maybe let's move into more interesting territory. Let's assume that the account you've given definitively proves again that the Shroud is indeed the Shroud of Christ, and that's his face specifically that's imprinted on it. Where does that get us? How is this important?
That's much more than I've claimed or argued, but if you want to take that for granted,
but let's assume that it does. I want to know what the stakes are. Sure. Like what does that get us if we assent to that?
Well, it gets you a piece of physical evidence that would corroborate the historical testimonies on which most Christians rely. Like, I think the Shroud, even if it did not exist, I would still be Christian. I'm just saying it's an additional piece of evidence that all the best skeptics with all the money in the world have not been able to explain.
Okay, so
that's certainly interesting.
Evidence for what?
Evidence for some sort of image formation on the Shroud that is not explained by our best modern science with all the money behind it.
No, not talking about the Shroud anymore. I'm saying the Shroud treated as verified proof that Christ was made contact with that piece of cloth.
Yeah. Well, that goes to the image formation. So if the image formation is either supernatural or something not in the power of nature or our present day technology, then that would suggest that whatever happened to him in the tomb that people recorded left this mark on the Shroud in such a way that it cannot be currently explained. And, most artifacts in history can be explained, whereas the Shroud is sort of unique in that no one has really explained it, even though they've tried for 100 years.
So the argument is that the image on the Shroud cannot be replicated scientifically.
Cannot be replicated or explained or placed in any sort of context.
So we don't know the chemical composition of what forms the image.
Well, we know that it's a dehydration of the uppermost fibrils in the flax fiber, and the question is how can you get that? How can you get that through a process known to an artist or a forger or some natural process? I mean, there have even been skeptics who have gone so far as to say there was like a pulse of electromagnetic or like a volcano, and it actually is Jesus, but it was just a natural thing. Like that's how far they'll go. It's like the twin theory of Jesus.
So I'm gonna read you something here. So according to the art historian Nicholas Allen, the image of the Shroud was formed by a photographic technique in the 13th century. Allen maintains that techniques already available for the 14th century, e.g. as described in the Book of Optics, which was at that time just translated from Arabic to Latin, were sufficient to produce primitive photographs, and that people familiar with these techniques would have been able to produce an image as found on the Shroud. To demonstrate this, he successfully produced photographic images similar to the Shroud, using only techniques and materials available at the time the Shroud was supposedly made. He described his results in his PhD thesis and papers published in several science journals and in a book. Silver bromide is believed by some to have been used for making the Shroud of Turin, as it is widely used in photographic films. Are you familiar with this, and can you rebut it?
Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with that claim, but I can't say I've actually fully read that paper. When is that from? What is the date on that? That'll help me better to tell if I've read it or not. It's from this year.
1993. It's citing three papers: 1993 and 1994, and then I guess the.
All right, so it's fairly old. I was 8 years old then. So, yeah. So that's certainly something I've been in contact with. But I mean, it's an interesting claim there. I'd like to see the outcome of these 12th century photographs.
Actually, I'm a little bit curious myself. Let's look at it.
As I highly doubt it's a three-dimensional photo negative with blood, not where the image is. That was painted on before the image was formed.
Oh, I mean, there's comment on that as well. I think they said something to the effect of like, here we go. Sturt member John D. German has noted it's not difficult to make a photograph which has 3D qualities if the object being photographed is lighted from the front and a non-reflective quote-unquote fog of some sort exists between the camera and the object. Then less light will reach and reflect from the portions of back from the portions of the object that are farther from the lens, thus creating a contrast which is dependent on distance. The front image, incidentally, is not directly compatible with the back image by a factor of, it looks like about 7 millimeters.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of moving around was going on at the time it was taken, but that would be that data would fit either scenario really. But of course, if you could rule out that it was made in the 12th century by referencing like references to it before that, or if you could prove the shroud itself was
hang on.
if you could prove the shroud itself is from the first century, or if you can prove that it was in the first century, Palestine through other methods, or if you can prove that nobody in the Middle Ages could have known the details anatomically or in terms of Roman crucifixion, then you've kind of ruled out at that point. You've ruled out the 12th century hypothesis.
I understand the point you're making, but the problem is that these are two incompatible arguments. On the one hand, you're saying that there's a long pedigree of knowing exactly how the shroud would be formed, and on the other hand, you're saying that it can't be formed because
I'm talking about knowing the shroud.
Well, hang on, slow down, stop, not done.
Sure.
And on the other hand, because you're also saying, well, the reason why they can't know it, of course, is because that would be an argument in favor of the shroud not being a forgery because they didn't know the anatomical details, and yet you're pointing to older texts that show the anatomical details.
Knowing that the shroud exists has nothing to do with knowing how the image was formed.
Hang on, you made specific reference to the depiction of the shroud.
Right. So that means it had to have
that's how you determine that the shroud we have now is the shroud they were talking about in these illustrations.
Right. So if the properties of the image are anatomically accurate, and if they have historical information that nobody in the 12th century would have been aware of, then that could tell you, along with other data, that it's not from the 12th century. But that doesn't mean the people who passed the tradition along had any idea how the image was formed. Of course, they believed it was formed miraculously. So, I mean, of course,
no, I'm not talking about how the image was formed. I'm talking about the details on the image itself. You're saying that we can verify that the shroud that they are talking about is the shroud we have now based on the details that they have depicted in their books. Yes. And yet at the same time, it can't be a forgery today because we had no knowledge of its details. Which one is it?
Well, because you're equivocating on details. So in the latter case that you just mentioned, I'm saying we have no details on how the image was formed.
I'm not talking about how the image was formed. I'm talking about
that's
details.
What I was talking about.
Okay, well, we're not talking about that anymore. I'm talking about the
things. You're putting words in my mouth.
Stop.
That's what I was talking about.
The things, the pictures, the characteristics of the shroud itself. Like there's an L shape formed by some puncture holes or something. Like where the blood is, how the arms are folded. Like this stuff is depicted in ancient texts. Okay. Right. And then we have the shroud now, which matches those characteristics. Great. Now you're arguing that it can't be a forgery on the grounds that that people contemporaneously to the shroud's known circulation had no knowledge whatsoever of what that shroud would look like. But then you're also
that's a mistake. Let me intervene here. Let me interject here. So of course the shroud looked at naturally without a photographic negative, you can still see the form on it. It's just in the negative form. You could still see the arms. You could still see the figure of the person. You could still see all the bloodstains. So you could definitely replicate that in art, even though you've never seen the true image of the photographic negative after 1902. So my claim was that it would have been sort of silly to preserve the shroud as the relic of his burial simply on the basis of the way it appeared naturally. But it was only in the 20th century that we actually found that this shroud that was preserved as the true burial cloth had these miraculous or unexplained qualities in terms of their image formation. Hopefully that clarifies.
Okay. Again, so I'm going to try to put this differently. So what are the arguments in favor, not referring to the qualities of the shroud itself? What are the sociological, shall we say, arguments in favor of the shroud not being a forgery?
Well, the whole chain of custody going back to early, the 4th century or earlier.
Okay, how do we determine
the very claim that it was a shroud long before these characteristics were known?
How do we determine that the shroud depicted by these early possessors of the shroud, or these people who have seen the shroud, wherever it was, how do we determine that this is the same shroud as the one we have now?
Well, in the first place, you could take those puncture marks. They're unique to that one shroud. They're not something that's an artistic
No, but hang on. Wait. Puncture marks where? Puncture marks in the old depiction or puncture marks on the shroud now?
No, the depiction shows those puncture marks, so that would narrow it down to that one artifact, because those are not artistic motifs; those are accidental burns that happened in one event, right? So not only that, but the fact that he's depicted naked, his thumbs are gone, he's wounded in the wrists rather than the palms. The same sort of blood flows on the
Okay,
head.
B3,
Yeah,
listen to me very
go on.
carefully, okay? Okay.
Sure.
So again, our sources for these for that time are not the characteristics of the shroud taken from the shroud. We have a middleman. We have somebody who has drawn an image depicting the shroud. My question to you is, how do we connect what they have drawn with the specific, like down to the physical location of it, the shroud that we have now?
I think I understand where you're going. You're suggesting that maybe people drew these images first, and then the shroud was copied from those images, right?
No. I am saying that even assuming that the people who drew that initial picture had an actual shroud before them that was 100% authentic, perhaps even with all of the same characteristics identically as the shroud we have now, how do you determine from the bare fact that they had an image that represents something that looks eerily similar to the shroud we have now? How do you determine that that is evidence that the shroud we have now is not a forgery, when that existence gives us a what's the word I'm looking for? What is it called? A template. That's it. Gives us a template for how to reconstruct the shroud they already had.
Well, I would never argue that way. I would never say the simple depiction of the shroud prior to the carbon dating is proof positive that the shroud goes back to Christ. And I haven't argued that way. I gave lots of other evidences.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The thing with the flax was a blur. I didn't even follow that.
Well, it's a real simple proposition, right? So flax can be dated, like an old barrel shroud can be dated because it has organic properties that dissipate at a certain rate, just like carbon dating. So the fact that the fact that the actual shroud has the presence of vanillin and lignin in quantities that you would not expect if it was only plucked out of the ground and formed into a shroud in the 13 or 1200s, then that is a dating method that refutes the carbon. So you have to pick which one you believe in. And there's actually 3 or 4 other dating methods too.
Okay, but biological processes can be arrested by myriad different things, and there could also be
and carbons can also be contaminated.
Yeah, but you yourself point out that the shroud was repaired. That would suggest the introduction of newer flax, no?
No, because they use cotton. Europe was not a flax grower. The shroud is made of linen from flax. It's a plant. Cotton is wool and cotton are not going to be similar.
Okay, but like the stuff obviously transmits. Like we have the shroud itself that is also made of flax in Europe.
Linen? No, it's not made in Europe. It's the linen, the herringbone.
No, I understand it's not made. I understand it's not made in Europe. But your assertion, the implicit assertion here that there is no way in hell that linen could make it to Europe is, it's.
No, I mean it's totally possible that a first century blank linen shroud made its way to Europe. That is a possibility. The question is it plausible that somebody who was making a forgery would go to that great length to buy a first century blank linen shroud in the 12th century? Like, I mean, that's silly. If you're a forger, you're just trying to trick some rubes to make some money. Like, you're not going to go up to the lengths to make the shroud with a photonegative image and proper anatomical blood flows and accurate first century data on crucifixion. I realize it's difficult to hear.
Charlemagne revived the crop of flax in the 8th century AD.
It's nothing to do with vanillin and lignin.
What do you mean?
Because the vanillin and lignin are about the age of the thing. If they grew the flax in the 12th century, then the lignin and vanillin data wouldn't be what they are.
Right, I see what you're saying. Okay, so
I'm not saying nobody ever grew flax in the 12th century. Saying the flax has a certain property where you can date it. I
don't know enough about the limitations of that form of dating to say that it would be definitively better or worse than the carbon dating. But again, like, it doesn't appear that any experts are actually like taking that seriously. It's not even.
Why does it not appear that way? Because you haven't seen them yet from Wikipedia.
Well, you haven't shown me them either.
And it is not my.
You can laugh all you want.
I'm telling you.
Okay, but
I'm telling you about these things. If you want to know them, you look them up.
But if that is indeed true, if that's you don't know them.
Well, I
You
do.
don't,
Just because I don't have their names on hand on a 5-minute
if you
notice
don't
doesn't
have
mean.
if you don't have any of their names, not even the names of the studies, then that would go towards.
Oh, this is a dodge. This is a dodge, right? So I came with a 5-minute preparation to talk about this.
I'm
Like,
not really.
if you
I'm
if
not
you
really.
if you want the references to the vanilla and lignin
You had a
studies, then you can
5 minute
easily.
preparation with no citations. Why are you doing that?
Well, I didn't. You came and said do it.
Yeah, but you're saying you had prepared a 5 minute presentation.
No. I said a 5-minute notice, no preparation other than my background knowledge. Right?
Okay, but it's not knowledge if you don't know where it comes from or how to verify it.
Sure, it is. That's ridiculous. You could believe in some scientific proposition you read 2 years ago without remembering the author of the paper. Use your reason.
If I didn't remember the author of the paper, and I didn't have with any degree of specificity as to how the paper was defended, then I wouldn't.
Right. So what author of what paper?
I wouldn't say that's knowledge.
What author of what paper convinced you of the Big Bang?
I wouldn't argue that I have knowledge of the particulars of the Big Bang.
So you don't believe in the Big Bang?
No, I do believe in the Big Bang because there seems to be a consensus at a low resolution.
What author of what paper do you remember the name of who taught you that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Right.
That's the consensus.
You don't know, so none of these things. So you don't know any of these things because you can't remember the author of the paper to tell me in 5 minutes notice.
Tell me the author of the Gospels.
Well, that's a completely different topic, and I'm not going to chase red herrings. I'm just showing you that you claim that because I can't name the author, I can easily get it to you after. I mean, look, all you have to do is DM me. I'll get you the papers. Like, don't use that as a
I'm not carrying this. I'm not.
Right, but then don't use a cheap rhetorical tactic that I don't know the name because I'm willing to give you the name after the debate.
Look, I think you're a bit confused here. I don't have any incentive to use cheap rhetorical tactics on you because
you're already not cheap rhetorical tactics. So you made it. You might have done it on accident.
B3. Yeah. I could let you run roughshod over me on every single point, and it would convince absolutely nobody. I have no reason to be underhanded with you. I'm just telling you, this doesn't work. Like this is not compelling.
I'm not saying you're being underhanded. I'm just saying that the line of reasoning you were using that I didn't have the name doesn't mean anything. You just DM me, and I'll get you the name in 20 minutes after the debate.
But listen to me. If you're going to make reference to again papers and things that are supposed to give credence to your position and you can't remember the names or the details of any of them, then I have no reason whatsoever to take those seriously or to waste precious time looking into them.
You just take them provisionally and then I'll provide you the papers that you DM me for. I'm happy to provide them.
I've taken them all provisionally already and you can't get
so then if you're doubtful about the status of the testing of the vanilla and lignin, I'm happy to find the paper for you after the debate. But I've never heard of somebody in a context of a debate that says, hey, take 10 minutes to go find these papers. Like,
well, you know what? I'm a creature of whimsy. Be my guest.
Well, that's why I feel it's a cheap rhetorical tactic, because I've seen this 100 times. You know? Where's the paper? Like, you don't do that in the middle of the debate. I'll get you the papers after. I'll post them in the Discord. I don't care.
Hang on. So you've seen this before, right?
Yeah, in debates, like when people
have asked you,
wall,
people have asked you in debate to produce the paper before.
Yeah, in other words, like during
you must be very experienced in procuring this paper efficiently.
No, I didn't.
You can do it in 10 minutes.
I didn't refer to this paper. I said in debates, I've had people when they're backed into a corner, they say, "Give me the paper." Like they're not going to read it to me.
Fine, but I'm going to give you.
What I typically say to people in that case is, I have no problem giving the paper. DM me or put a pin in the chat, and I'll get it for you after the debate.
We're not doing that.
You don't pause a debate and then read the paper for 30 minutes.
I do whatever I want. So this is the bargain I'm giving you. You can take as much time as you want within the span of half an hour. Within the span of half an hour, I will let you procure the paper. If this paper is so distant from your experience that you can't even figure out how to find it, then I'm not going to take it seriously.
Well, I know exactly how to find it. I'm on the phone now. I can't even move away from the Chrome browser without losing connection here. So that's not the nature. We didn't have a pre-planned, prepared debate where we come with papers. So that to me, that's just a rhetorical dodge. I'm happy to produce it for you afterwards.
But if you listen, if you have this whole presentation prepared, I would expect you to know.
I have no prepared presentation. No prepared presentation. This is all off the memory. In fact, I'm making soup right now. I can't even.
Okay, so my question again, we can break down my reaction to this recurringly for the last hour is your memory of what?
Oh, my memory of having watched 15, 20 in-depth documentaries on the subject and reading dozens of papers on them over the past 4 or 5 years.
Okay, somebody wants me to ask you before we go. I'm really curious what would be the explanation that the Catholic Church refuses to accept it as authentic. I don't particularly care about that, but you can.
Well, I think the Catholic Church doesn't want to commit itself officially to something that could be wrong, and I agree it could be wrong. There could be some wild natural explanation for the shroud that we're nowhere near finding it. So the church never commits itself to something as uncertain as the shroud. Even if it had, they're still in favor of the shroud. They say you could have devotion to it. Many popes have said they think it's genuine, but they're not willing to confirm that.
So why are we arguing about this?
Oh, because I asked people why they haven't looked into the shroud when they demand physical evidence for the resurrection, but don't actually look into it, just as you haven't.
Because even the evidence for the shroud is lacking.
But you don't know that. You've never looked into it. I've only given you a slim scraping off the top of the evidence. There's like 20 other arguments for it.
Well, so you say, but you can't produce any of them. So.
Right, but your reluctance to even broach the subject on your own time, it just shows me that this facetious demand for physical evidence is just a dodge. Like, you don't want physical evidence. I think it's stupid to ask for physical evidence in the first place. There's plenty of historical evidence, but the fact that we do have physical evidence and nobody's actually nobody on the atheist side even wants to look at it.
The reason why it's silly to ask for physical evidence is because there's a poverty of historical evidence anyways, and that's to be expected given the time period. This isn't like a comparative thing where we have more physical evidence for everything else and just not this. That's immaterial. The question is, how does this stand? You're welcome to. The question is, how does this particular thing stand as compelling physical evidence for the assertion? And it doesn't. You can't even link it.
I'll tell you what, because it corroborates the resurrection accounts, and it has a historical pedigree. It is unexplained by science. Its properties, despite the billions spent on it.
Wait, it only corroborates the account if the argument is settled that it is contemporaneous and identical with it doesn't work. You have one piece of it's a piece of fabric.
Well, it's more than a piece of fabric, obviously, just as a book is more than a piece of paper. It has properties. It has discrete properties about it. Which every atheist who wants to win some status, go out and prove this is a forgery and artifact, and they can't do it. So obviously, we have a problem.
I'm not an atheist. I have disdain for this because it's arrogant and silly. Like, you have such a poverty of data here. You can't even we've only scratched the surface. What do you mean a poverty of data? We've only scratched the surface. There's nothing beneath the surface. I've asked you.
Well, how, you don't know that. You've never even looked into the subject. This is just bravado. It's just
okay. But there are a million. Listen to me. There are a million different puddles I will stomp in before I waste my time on this. Anyways,
so that just shows me my original contention was correct. The people who demand physical evidence don't actually want to look into that's which is provided to them.
I don't demand physical evidence. I don't.
Well, I'm not saying you, but you came to the defense of those who do demand that.
If you're not talking about, hang on. If you're not talking about me, then my behavior here doesn't indicate anything.
Well, if you're coming to their defense, then you've taken up the burden of proof on their side, right? You should just walk away and say, I'm agnostic about it.
I'm just saying that they have no reason to give this attention. This is a waste of time.
The entire thesis of the debate is this: people who demand physical evidence for the resurrection or for Christ or miracles, once presented with it, they just scoff, laugh, smirk. They don't actually look into it.
How is the Shroud of Turin?
I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm saying you're taking their case. You're carrying their brief.
Hang on. So the Shroud of Turin is now evidence for miracles.
Right. So if you have an artifact that is best explained by something that's not in the powers of an artist, a forger, or a natural process to create, then that would be probabilistic evidence that something happened with Christ's body that made this image on the shroud. Something supernatural.
We haven't even linked it to Christ's body. We've
already done that multiple times. By the pedigree of the actual artifact and by the characteristics it shows, and by the pollen, by the
except
limestone and everything.
Except we haven't.
Limestone. The dating of it.
No, we're circling
the accuracy. Look, it's not a piece of art, man. The anatomical accuracy.
I didn't say it was.
Well, no.
I didn't say it. That was
in circles at this point.
Yes, because you keep forgetting the last 5 minutes of argumentation every time you switch to a different thing. It's like.
Well, I don't even know why you took this case up when you don't know anything about this topic.
Well, I was hoping that you knew something about the topic, but it seems like
Well,
you
I
have a
told you a
narrative in your
great
head that
deal.
you do know
I
something
told
about the
you.
topic with no citations or references.
I mean, I
Like, what do
told
you
you a
want?
great deal about. I told you a great deal about the topic, from its history to how it became an
Look, I'm
object of
gonna, I'm
interest.
gonna, I'm gonna, I'm gonna tell you about the veracity of what's the thing that Scientologists do of e-reader, or not e-reader? What are they called? E-meter findings.
I don't know what that
E-meter.
is.
I don't know either. I'm trying to. My memory of Scientology has gone out the window. But it's like you got to have something. Like,
Well, I
you've been
have
doing this
plenty, and
for years. You have nothing to hand.
see, to me, this feels like, I feel like you've been whipped, and now you're making these broad, vague, like, you're up to something. I've given you lots, and I've given you direction on how to find more. If you're interested, look. Don't look if you're not interested.
All the direction you've given me is this website, and you can't remember a single paper from it.
No, I told you Habermas is like a mainstream respected scholar. He does lectures on the topic. Robert Spitzer does lectures on the topic. People who are on the START team do lectures on the topic. Barry Schwartz, the photographer on the START team, does lectures on the topic. And you have peer-reviewed studies. You have journals devoted to the Shroud. Like, and there's ample evidence out there for you to look into if you want the specific names and dates and which colleges did the journals. And you can get all of that. This is not the purpose of this debate. It's to lay out the basic case.
Okay, so just to be clear, it is a debate then.
Oh, a discussion, debate, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, so I don't know what to say, except every single thing that I cite is because
This
I
is
looked it
meta.
up.
I don't want to hear the meta. Like, either have an argument on the specific
What do you mean?
topic. I don't
What
want
does
to
that mean? You don't want to hear the meta?
The meta is like, it's not actually the argument anymore. You're arguing about the argument. I'm not interested in arguing about the argument.
Your
That can be
argument.
judged by
Your
the
argument.
audience.
Your
The audience can judge for themselves
B3.
who made the better argument.
B3. Your argument relies on anecdotes about studies that you can't even remember.
Okay, so again, you're arguing about the argument. I'm not going to fall into that trap. Like, people in the audience can judge for themselves who presented the proper case, and they can follow up on their own. I'm not going to argue with you about the argument.
Oh, well, then we're done then. Take care. Oh, well, that was painful. I'll not do that again. Whew, have a good night, guys. Sorry for wasting your time. That was, oh my god. Oh my god. That was exhausting. Yeah, Saints and Scholars, I had to shush him, otherwise he would just keep on talking. Like, I'm not going to be like steamrolled on my own show when I have the buttons, right? That's just silly. I offered to bring in somebody to moderate if he wanted it to be fair. And sorry for booting you, but like I'm not talking to someone who's then just refusing to engage. B3 came in with a TED Talk-esque presentation without any actual sources. This was odd. Yeah, so like here's the thing: if you're going to, like, I'm playing through in my head how someone comes to have that level of detail sort of sort of ready to hand in their brain and has no references whatsoever in memory, like none. Like that's when you don't know what you're talking about. Anyways. See if I missed any questions. I'm not Catholic. For my analysis, there's a certain process that is undertaken legally within the Catholic Church to receive, accept relics the same way they receive and reject certain dogmas. Okay. Like, it seemed like when I asked what the stakes were, it seemed like the argument switched to something else entirely, like immediately. I think the best explanation for why that is because he didn't actually look into any paper and only watched apologetic videos. It seems that way. Like, I haven't looked deeply into the Shroud of Turin because it's sort of definitionally the kind of thing just wouldn't help you. Like, life's short. If I'm consistently unimpressed by advocates of a certain mode of analysis, then I'm not going to waste my time. So I don't even know what to make of that. Like, so just to lay out the issue that I was having ultimately is that even if I concede that everything said about the Shroud is correct, we haven't actually established the identity of the Shroud with the image depicted that is referencing a similar Shroud. Like, all you get from that is it's a similar Shroud. That's all you get. Thank you. And then he says, like, it can't be a forgery because they didn't know how Roman executions were performed. But then he says, like, this is the Shroud they had. How do we know this? Because it depicts the same features as the Shroud that we have now. Like, well, wait a minute. If we have an ancient text that depicts the features of the Shroud that we have now, then there is every reason to think that people existed who knew what the Shroud looked like, or who knew what those what the features detailed on that image would look like. I agree that the Shroud isn't that great as a proof for Jesus' historicity. You could analyze writings from Midrashic, Talmud literature, or secular sources and come up with a far better case. I mean, like, some of the like, generally speaking, we have a massive poverty of information about that time period, and even for some time after that. So, like, for me, what I would look for as evidence would be, for example, things that it introduced that were novel, that we can't really trace to sort of stuff in the environment or preceding it. And what you would look for is the sudden appearance of concepts that rely on sort of specific historical contingencies that aren't present in previously existing literature, and that would be an argument for dating, let's say, like a text to a certain period. I don't see what, like, even if I conceded that we can date this Shroud and locate it directly in Jerusalem at the time period, even that wouldn't be an argument for saying it's Christ specifically, or for saying that it's evidence for miracles. He seems to be thinking that a picture on a piece of cloth is beyond human ability to produce. If it was beyond human ability to produce, people would be more interested in it. And from what little I've seen, there seems to be almost no reputable contention that it actually is beyond human capacity to reproduce, even in the time period with period materials. Like, there's just nothing here. Even with things like the broken legs, I don't know how you determine that. How do they determine that we just have the Shroud, right? We don't have the body. So how did they determine that the legs weren't broken? Like, if this person was given like a proper burial and whatnot, well, one of the things they would do is they'd clean up the body and they would arrange the pieces so it doesn't look like a mangled mess. And like silly things, like there's blood on the head from a crown of thorns. How do you determine it's from a crown of thorns? A crown of thorns. And when you actually look at like the things that are apparently blood on the head, they're dripping downwards. But if the body was cleaned, presumably while dead, it would have been on its back when the Shroud was placed on it. I don't know. This was dumb. This was just dumb. I'm going to go back to researching Kabul and doing a reading of the Fall of Kabul through Machiavelli, so that should be interesting. Hoping to have that up by tomorrow. Anyways, thank you for enduring this with me. Take care.